Hey friends, welcome to the Church Planting Podcast. I'm Greg Nettle and I serve as president of Stadia, where we want to help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation. This is an amazing episode of the Church Planting Podcast. I have my new friend, Bryan Loritts, with us. Bryan is the teaching pastor at Summit Church. He's an award-winning author of numerous books. I'm going to talk a little more about that later. And he's dedicated his ministry to advancing and equipping the multi-ethnic church. This is an incredible podcast. Share it with everyone. Welcome to the Church Planting Podcast. Hey, Bryan, it's so good to have you here on the Church Planting Podcast. Welcome, my friend.
Greg, thank you so much for having me.
I want you to know we had our entire staff at Stadia read your book, Right Color, Wrong Culture. So thanks for having an impact on the entire Stadia organization and my life personally.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I'm glad to hear that book was a blessing to you all.
That and many others. I mean, you're a prolific author, speaker, and leading organizations as well as pastoring. I don't know how you get it all done, but we want to talk today and focus on how we communicate. We have multipliers in every area that listen and join us on this podcast. And so let's talk about your journey personally of how you've learned to communicate specifically in multi-ethnic settings.
Well, yeah. So, the thing I was blessed with is to grow up in a Christian home where, both my parents loved Jesus. Both my parents happen to be African-American, as you can imagine. And but they also at the same time worked for a white evangelical group called Crew. Back then it was known as Campus Crusade for Christ.
Yeah, fantastic organization.
And my dad was a church planter, and the churches he planted just happened to be primarily black. So typical week for me is at my all black church on Sundays. And then our schools tend to skew 50-50. And then, immersed in my parents' primarily white organization. What I didn't realize was those three streams were kind of baking into me a profound tutorial in how to communicate to people of different ethnicities. I think part of the primary thing that's helpful, even more than sitting in a classroom or reading a book on it, it's actually having relationships with people who are profoundly different than you. And so my friendships, when we did sleepovers at the house as I was a kid, I mean, it was some of everybody, to be honest. I didn't realize it at the time again, but those things were profound influences as it relates to my ability, my growing ability, and being able to communicate to others.
Bryan, how hard was it for you? I mean, today, I think the correct terminology is kind of code shifting. You were actually being enculturated. I don't know that you were code shifting necessarily, but was it difficult growing up in those differing environments?
Not really. I mean, it just became, I think, a subconscious thing, this whole idea of contextualization. I think even if you take that away, I think any African-American, any Latino, any Asian, any minority person, even to this day, who is successful by the world standards, I'm not talking about biblical standards, but by the world standards, you still have to primarily know how to relate to our white brothers and sisters. And I don't say that in a negative way at all, but the fact that I went to their schools, it just became kind of a way of life. If I want to get to this point, then I've got to be able to learn how to communicate and relate to them. I never looked at it as a negative. Years later, I see it as a profound positive, because that's not a two-way street. Our white brothers and sisters, in order to be successful by the world standards, don't have to learn how to relate to me or minorities, right? And
we do by biblical standards, but not by the world standards.
But not by the world standards. And so what that kind of gave me an extra gear, right? That years later would just serve me well. So I'm profoundly grateful for it. But in real time, I didn't feel like it was a negative thing at all.
Fantastic. So let's talk about the communication piece, because so many church planters today, so many church leaders, God's called them to areas or has brought people into their sphere of influence in every direction that are multi-ethnic now. How important is it to be able to connect with and communicate with a multi-ethnic audience today?
Oh, it's a matter of life and death. In my line of work, this whole idea of trying to build multi-ethnic churches, I'd say it's 80% is how you say something. It's not even the content, but it's trying to figure out where the landmines are, what the trigger words are. So, for example, at our church, as I've been working with, especially with our minority staff, I don't allow them to use phrases like white privilege or white supremacy or white fragility. I'm not saying that those concepts aren't real. I'm not saying them. What I'm saying is the moment you use those phrases, it shuts down conversation, right? And so we can no longer come to the table with one another. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to keep you on the other side of the table engaged for as long as possible, right? Now, at the end of the day, you may still be offended, but I don't want it to be unnecessarily so. And so my ability over the years to figure out what the trigger words are, to figure out what cuts off conversations, and then ask the question, is this an unnecessary thing, or can I still deal with the concept without using unnecessarily offensive language? That is a skill that's just picked up over time. And by having relationships with people on the other side of the street. Let me ask you this, Bryan. So my dominant heritage is Indigenous American Chickasaw Nation. I've been lumped into the white category for most of my life until recently. I've just been starting to write it in on every document and so forth. What would you say the flip side? I mean, you said for a Black communicator, there are trigger words and stuff. What about on the flip side for those who are white and speaking in multi-ethnic settings? Yeah, so I think nowadays, if you use language like woke or critical race theory, again, I'm not saying those things aren't real. I do need to call a timeout and at least ask the question, exactly what do you mean? I find now that my white evangelical friends, some of them, whenever the subject of race is brought up, they automatically go to those terms. And many of them don't even know what those terms mean or the origin of those terms. So I think we have to be very careful with our language, come in asking questions, not making statements. So that's why when those words are used, I want to call a timeout and say, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so in your experience, for everybody that's learning from you right now, if you had to call out, hey, here are a couple of the big challenges when communicating in a multi-ethnic setting, what would a couple of those be?
Oh, I would say now more than ever, everything's become politicized. I feel profoundly that I am now, right now, is the most fragile, the most sensitive, dare I use the word, at times I even struggle with a sense of, is there any hope? Because now we've put everything in a political box and you're either on the right and you're on the left. For me to be passionate about issues of justice and racial equality, you automatically then make some assumptions about me politically and ideologically. The Charlie Kirk thing happens, right? And for the first time in my lifetime, I walk into church and now I'm looking at two groups of people who feel profoundly oppressed. That's a new one, right? Our white evangelical friends feel, and I'm not here to question that at all. What you feel is what you feel. They feel oppressed. Their oppression that they feel is more on the political, ideological lines. And then you've got minority groups who are like, man, we've got a lot of receipts for our historic oppression, which is along racial lines. Some of them actually attach it to a certain political party affiliation.
Correct.
And now I'm going, how are these two groups are going to come together occupying the same space?
What's the answer? I mean, I'm sitting here going, yes, I agree. I mean, that's a huge challenge. Anybody that's speaking publicly, regardless of the platform, is facing.
Yeah. So one of the things, just a really helpful tool that we use here at our church, it's called the communication pyramid. Essentially, there's 5 levels of communication, right? The most surface level is cliche. Good morning. How are you? That's cliche communication. You've communicated, but really haven't communicated. The next 2 levels, 2 and level 3, I call it sports center talk. It's where most guys hang out. Yep. Level 2 is facts, right? It's, who won the game? How many points did Steph have? Level 3 is opinion. Who do you think's the greatest of all time? Michael Jordan, of course. It's not LeBron James.
Oh, no. I mean, Cleveland, Brian. It's LeBron James, my friend.
Oh, and then level 4. So here's where I'm getting to. Level 4 is emotive. It's sharing how I feel. And then level 5 is transparency. It's sharing who I am. So here's why it's important when we talk about, Charlie Kirk moments in the church, Charlie Kirk, George Floyd, whatever it may be. When someone comes to me with level 4, I think a leadership fail is to match their level 4 with my level 2, which is historically the breakdown, right? When a person of color feels like, man, George Floyd or whoever it was unjustly killed, sometimes some of our white brothers and sisters will be like, hold on, we don't know the facts. That shouldn't be the first play. Now, there is a place for facts, but the first play, this is what the Bible talks about when it says, I want you to grieve with those who grieve, right? Level 4. And so what helps me when I'm trying to shepherd and lead people in our church who are grieving, right? They're grieving Charlie Kirk and they say he was a martyr. I'm not going to hit them with my opinions or someone else's opinions. That's not my first thing. My first thing is to give them a hug, deep empathy, deep listening, grieving with those who grieve. I think that's the path forward into oneness. That's profound. And even as you said, made the George Floyd comment, my first response to you was, I'm so sorry, my brother. But I don't know that I would have been there, Brian, even 6 years ago, just to be, real transparent with you. That's something that we learn in relationship and honestly from hearing it together in a room like this. Because it's so easy, I think, for us to go, well, let's really talk about what happened there. Mm-hmm. And I've watched that over and over again. And what I hear you saying is that's just going to create barriers and erect walls and really end the conversation. I liken it to marriage. Right? When my wife comes to me with level 4, I've had to learn the hard way that if I hang out in lawyer land and I don't make an attempt to sit with her and how she's feeling, that just doesn't play well. And it doesn't play well in these kinds of moments as well.
Bryan, as we talk about communicating authentically in a multi-ethnic session, you've mentioned the word relationships numerous times here. I had an African-American woman who was my Kingdom diversity coach. We had just a diversity coach a few years ago, 4 years ago. And I was living at the time in a 98% white community, had been there for 2 decades, and God had called me to that community. But she said to me, Greg, you can't stay where you are and become the person God wants you to be, which led us on this journey of moving into the city of Cleveland, where we're now the minority racially where we live. And now we live in proximity to people of other ethnicities. They're our friends. They're part of our lives. And it's utterly transforming us as we learn let's talk about relationships. What are you going to say to those people out there who maybe they're not in relationship with people any different from them?
Yeah, I think what you're describing is the incarnation, right? I think the basic message of the incarnation is Jesus leaving the comforts of heaven, coming to earth, this place, of course, that he was well acquainted with, but was foreign to him, taking on flesh, living among us. I mean, this is what John Perkins really popularized it a generation or so ago. It's the idea of incarnational ministry. It's It's what Paul gets to in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 to 23, where he says, to the Jew, I became a Jew. To those outside the law, scholars tell us those are Greeks or Gentiles, I became as one outside the law. I do it all for the sake of the gospel. And the key to that text is I have become. And the idea there, one commentator says, it's the ability to get inside of another person's skin to feel what they feel. Now, what I love about this, the writer of Hebrews now reaches back to the incarnation of Jesus Christ in Hebrews chapter 4. And he says, we don't have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. This blows my mind, because what the writer of Hebrews seems to be saying is, Jesus's sympathy muscles were strengthened. His ability to sympathize was deepened by proximity, right? It's him coming to earth, taking on flesh, walking among us. Now, again, he can always relate to us, but it's only post the incarnation that he can relate to us on a deeper level, because he took on flesh. He knows what that feels like. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that that means we all have to move into a certain kind of neighborhood. I do think the universal principle is we've got to be able to immerse ourselves in another person's situation. Let me say one more thing here. There's a great book called Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus, written by a scholar. It's actually his PhD dissertation.
I'm writing it down now.
Yeah. Reggie Williams. He tells a story about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, of course, who we know, one of the great 20th century martyrs. Bonhoeffer comes to Harlem in the 1930s to do, a fellowship over at Union, which is the seminary of Columbia. And when he gets here, Bonhoeffer says, I thought I was a believer. I probably wasn't, but because I thought I was, I started looking for churches. Bonhoeffer's language, he says, none of the white churches did it for me. The only church that I really felt like the gospel was being proclaimed in all of its glorious implications, Bonhoeffer says, was the Abyssinian Baptist Church. It's a historically black church, which is still around to this day. It's in Harlem. This is 1930s Harlem. This is the height of the Harlem Renaissance, right? And so here's this guy, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, blonde hair, the whole nine. He joins a black church. He has a black pastor, Adam Clayton Powell. I think it was senior, could have been junior at the time. He starts teaching in Sunday school, makes a friend with a guy named Albert Fisher. Albert introduces him to Negro spirituals, which revolutionized his life. Albert says, hey, man, let's go down to the Jim Crow South. 1930s, Bonhoeffer hops on a train with Albert. They go to the Jim Crow South. You know that phrase where he talks about cheap grace?
Yes, of course.
Reggie says Bonhoeffer didn't come up with that. He got that from his black pastor. Here's what Bonhoeffer says. Bonhoeffer says, I don't go back to Germany to stand up for the oppressed Jews unless I first see the gospel lived out among the oppressed blacks in Harlem. So he's saying in other words, what he's saying is what changed me is immersing myself in a context where I became the minority, and that had profound rippling implications. So I'm just saying all that to say, I'm agreeing 100% that what strengthens our ability to communicate to people in general, it's us being relationally connected with them.
I'm just taking it all in and processing as you're speaking here. I'm reminded of Eugene Peterson's translation in the Message. It says God moved into the neighborhood,
yes.
Back and which is one of my favorite verses. And the importance of proximity. One of the things I'm processing as we're talking, as I'm on my journey here in my new neighborhood, is one of the things that's been painful, Bryan, is, and I'm asking you to speak into this, is the reality is I can get close to you as my black brother, but I'm not black. And sometimes if I act like I can relate too much, I actually damage the relationship as well. Like, can you speak to that as we're communicating to a multi-ethnic audience? The reality is I have to retain the culture in which I live and exist and have been created, while at the same time being relatable to multi-ethnic audiences. And there can be sometimes, if I try to cross the line and act too Black or too Hispanic, does that ever become offensive? Is that a landmine we have to watch out for?
Yeah, especially in our postmodern society, right, where we place a high value on authenticity. It's just one of the things that I hate about what Satan has done to our country and culture. And that is, we're not starting from a place of trust with one another. We're starting, in many of these kind of cross-cultural relationships, we're starting from a net negative with each other. So I'm not seeing you, I'm seeing your skin and attaching that to historical context. And so I think we can get there, but as long as we understand that the unfortunate reality, it's not right, but it's true. And the truth is that we bring a context into these things, and we come into relationships for the most part, making assumptions about other people. And again, I think there's a way to overcome that, but that's going to come through kind of relational equity where I'm putting a lot of time and trust is being built. And I think one of the best ways to build trust is to have a posture of humility. And one of the best ways to have a posture of humility is to ask a lot of questions and to own whatever deficits you may have. You know, I love it when I get questions like, hey, Bryan, I know this question might sound silly, but I just don't know. And that immediately puts me at ease because now you're coming to me not as an expert, but as a learner. So that's what I always encourage here is learn the art of asking questions. Jesus asked a lot of questions in the Bible. And if Jesus could ask a lot of questions, I would encourage us, ask questions and posture yourself in humility.
Okay, let's say I want to become really good at communicating to a multi-ethnic audience. I'm just going, are there pragmatic steps that I can take? My Kingdom Diversity coach said, Greg, and for me, it was, you need to change your neighborhood. And if you want to go to this next level of where God can develop you to really love people, this was the interesting thing for me. I have to incarnate myself in a new community, but I have to be incarnated by them in my new community. That's it was way more about what God was doing to me rather than me coming in to do anything in the community. But so what's some practical steps for someone who says, I'm not sure what my first, second, third steps should be?
Yeah, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but all this comes back to relationships. So let me take it out of a cultural or race thing. And let me just say, whatever value you're trying to communicate, the number one question your audience is asking is, okay, are you all in on this value? Whatever value you're trying to communicate as a communicator, your audience is asking, are you living this? So if I'm trying to really drive into the culture of my community, of my church, my organization, let's just say evangelism, this whole idea of sharing your faith, what's going to best serve me is to sprinkle in analogies and illustrations about what I'm doing in my own personal life and the non-Christian relationships that I have. And again, I know it can get sticky, it can come across as arrogant if you're not careful, but that's helping me to gain some credibility with my audience. And so the very fact that you've moved into this neighborhood, I think it just lends itself to, just naturally talking about some of your relationships in an analogous way. So I think the way that we get there, again, we want to talk from a place of authenticity, right? And integrity. The way that we get there is just forming relationships with people and where and when it makes sense to be able to speak out of those relationships. I think another thing that I would say real quickly that would really help people is, I think great communication in general, this is a universal communication technique, is I have to know in advance what a person's objection will be and to beat them to the punch on both sides. And so I think that's going to always be helpful, is to be able to anticipate people's objections, cut them off at the knees before they even raise the question, and to call them to something greater, which is the gospel.
Give me an example. Give us an example of how would that play out?
Golly, if I'm talking about, let's say, the need for people to engage themselves, let's say, in justice, right? I want to fight injustice. I want you to really engage in this. And let's say I'm talking MLK weekend, right? And I'm talking to a multi-ethnic audience. And I would say to some people something like this. I know that there's some of you all who are here and you don't believe in this whole concept. You would say you don't believe in this whole concept of systemic or structural injustice. I want to gently push back on that, because many of the people who say that, and rightly so, you fight against abortion. Now, how do you fight against abortion? You appeal to the courts. You were glad when a certain Supreme Court justice or justices were put there. Now, I'm not trying to turn this into a political thing, but what have you just done? You didn't just have a prayer meeting to take down Planned Parenthood. You actually fought it through structural means because you see it as a structural injustice. Now, if you'll do that over here, why can't we do that over here? That's an example.
Okay, that makes sense. So if I'm speaking in a setting and someone is, whether they say it out loud or they're just making the assumption, oh, Greg Nettle is woke, and using it in a negative connotation, my way of stopping that objection before it starts might be to say something like, hey, some of you might even be thinking now, oh, Greg Nettle, the speaker, he's just woke. The reality is what I'm engendering is a biblical view of what the book of Revelation presents, where people of every tribe, tongue, okay, yes.
Bingo. Yes.
And so it diffuses it before, because I mean, who knows even what woke is, right? I mean, it's to your early.
Right. Yeah. Well, and to give you one more brief example, the way that we kind of handle these issues at the church is, we're very clear that we want to be multi-ethnic. Well, when we get accusations of being woke, we're just like, hey, wait a minute. Our mission field, the Raleigh-Durham area, is 65% white, 35% people of color.
Yes.
We're just trying to reach our whole mission field.
Yes.
And immediately people, the blood pressure drops and they're able to receive that because we've kind of cut them off at the knees.
Bryan Loritts, thanks for joining us on the Church Planting Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Thanks for listening to the Church Planting Podcast. The Church Planting Podcast is part of the Stadia Podcast Network. To find more great episodes and to see how Stadia can help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation, be sure to check out stadia.org/podcasts.